All right. So, first off, any questions on the homework before we turn the homework in? I think it's yours, but I'm not sure.
Did you grade the test?
You did a test? Yeah, you have it back already.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I blinked.
Yeah. Okay.
Having
Done?
no sleep.
Make sure your name's on them, and then turn them in up here. So start by factoring those completely. First one, I would factor out a 2x squared. That's going to leave me with 4x squared minus 9. 4x squared is a perfect square, 9 is a perfect square, and more importantly, I have a subtraction sign in between them. So that's going to factor to be 2x minus 3. And 2x plus 3. So we get that. Over here, I would factor out a 4x. Leaves me with x squared plus 2x minus 5. And that one's not factorable. There aren't two numbers that multiply together to be negative 5 and add to be positive 2. So we stay with that. Questions on those two? So we'll get the fifth way of factoring. The fifth way of factoring is that factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping is used when you have an even number of terms bigger than 4. So that's how we factor by grouping. So if you got 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 16 or 20, if you got that many terms, we're going to factor that by grouping first. Okay? And what you do is you cut the polynomial in half. So now you've got 2 halves. And you're going to run then 3 greatest common factors on that polynomial. One on the left half, one on the right half, and then one on the results. Okay? So what grouping looks like is this. Here's our polynomial. X cubed plus 7x squared plus 8x minus 56. And that's our polynomial. We need to factor it by grouping. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the polynomial in half. And I'm going to look strictly on the left side here. And I'm going to GCF whatever I can out of that. What's my GCF of just the red box?
X squared.
X squared. Okay? Leaves me with now I'm going to GCF the right side, the green box. 8. Yeah. What's left over? Now I'm going to GCF that statement, or that partially factored one. What shows up in both red and green? X minus 7. So I'm going to pull out, or I'm going to greatest common factor, and x minus 7. What's left over? Then I'm going to ask myself, can either of those two parts be factored? And in this case, it can't. Okay, but that's not necessarily true in all cases. Okay? So if I can't factor anymore, then this is my answer. Okay? Try that one. Divide it in half. Factor out a 9t squared. Leaves me with 3t plus 5. Factor out a negative 1. Leaves me with 3t plus 5. Factor out a 3t plus 5. Leaves me with 9t squared minus 1. 9t squared minus 1, perfect square minus a perfect square. Yes? Yeah. So then this becomes 3t plus 5, 3t minus 1, 3t plus 1. Good? Try that. Divide it in half. Factor out an x squared. Leaves me with 2x plus 1. Factor out a 1. 2x plus 1. Factor out a 2x plus 1. Leaves me with x squared plus 1. X squared plus 1, yes, it is a perfect square and a perfect square, but it is not minus, so it's not factorable. Okay? Enough with the equations, or with me with the expressions. Let's get to factoring. Okay? So now, going forward, you're going to have to read the problem, and you're going to have to decide if it's got an equal sign or if it doesn't. And if it does have an equal sign, that's a solve. If it doesn't have an equal sign, that's a factor, or a simplify. Okay? That's the tell right now. Okay? Fundamental theorem of algebra says that the degree of a polynomial also tells you how many total solutions that exist for that equation. Okay? So the degree, the biggest exponent, tells you the number of solutions that you should get. Today, we're only going to worry about real solutions. We're not going to get into imaginary solutions until later on next week. Okay? Today, we're dealing with real solutions. So, no imaginaries, no I's today. Okay? So, in this particular problem, number 1 here, 4x to the 5th minus 40x cubed equals negative 36x, how many answers do we need to come up with? What?
5.
Why 5?
Because the biggest exponent is 5.
The biggest exponent is 5, so we need 5 answers when it's all said and done. Okay? The degree tells us the total number of answers you're going to get in a solving problem. Okay? So, first step. First step is you're going to get it equal to 0. So if I was getting it equal to 0, I would add 36x to both sides. That's going to give me 4x to the 5th power minus 40x cubed plus 36x equals 0. Step number 2 then says we're going to factor until we can't factor anymore. So, looking at that, what would you do first?
Find the GCF.
What did GCF do you come up with? 4x, yeah, because each term has an x in it, doesn't it? Yeah, so 4x, love it. That leaves me with x to the 4th power minus 10x squared plus 9. Are there two numbers that multiply together to be positive 9 and add to be negative 10? What? Negative 9, negative 1. So then this would factor to be 4x times x squared minus 9 times x squared minus 1. Any of those perfect square minus perfect squares? Both of them are, right? So then this becomes 4x times x minus 3 times x plus 3 times x minus 1 times x plus 1. Well, we factored all the way. Do we factor any more? Nope, can't factor anymore. Okay, so we factored completely. Step number 3 says we are going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So now I've got to set each of the factors equal to 0. So that's 4x equals 0. x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, and x plus 1 equals 0. Then I have to solve all of those. So I'm going to divide by 4. And that's going to give me x equals 0. I'm going to add 3. That's going to give me x equals 3. I'm going to subtract 3. And that's going to give me x equals negative 3. I'm going to add 1. That's going to give me x equals 1. I'm going to subtract 1. And that's going to give me x equals negative. How many of them do we have? 5. Any of them imaginary?
Yes.
Any of them imaginary?
Yes.
Any of them imaginary?
No.
No, because there's no i's in any of them. We can have negative numbers. We're not scared of them, just like we're not scared of fractions. Okay? Okay? So all of those are our answers then. So we would write them as either negative 3, negative 1, 0, 1, and 3, or we would write them as 0, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3. If you wanted to put x equals out there and include that in your answer, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Yeah. But you don't have to. You just need the list. Okay? Yeah, buddy? Okay, let's try this one. We'll do this one together, and then I got one more for you to do on your own. Step number 1 says what? Set equals 0. So how am I going to get this one equal to 0?
3x squared.
Add 3x squared to both sides. That gives me x to the 4th power plus 3x squared minus 10 equals 0. Okay, no GCF. Yeah, so right into factoring then, two numbers that multiply together to be negative 10 and add to be positive 3.
Positive 5 and negative 2.
Can I factor anymore? Nope, can't factor anymore. Okay, so then I have to set my factors equal to 0. Then I gotta solve. What do I get when I take the square root of negative 5? Nope. Close. Nope. Farther away.
1 side. Or no, not 2 side. Square root 5.
Okay. How many answers should I get just in that equation?
4.
Just in this one. Just in this purple one. 2. So if you only give me 1, you're wrong.
Oh, positive and negative I square root of 5.
Most people do. Okay. Now we go to the other one. So there's my 4 answers, correct? Okay. Are all of them real?
No.
No. Which ones are not real?
The imaginary ones.
These 2 imaginary ones are not real. So they're not part of my answer solution because it only told me to give all real answers. So the only answers there that I would give are plus and minus the square root of 2. Okay. You try that one.
Take control of this.
Divide it in half. Factor out an x squared. Leaves me with x plus 3. Factor out a 5. Leaves me with x plus 3. Factor out an x plus 3. Leaves me with x squared plus 5. Can't factor anymore, so we get x plus 3 equals 0. X squared plus 5 equals 0. Subtract 3. X equals negative 3. Subtract 5. Take the square root. Already know that I'm going to be imaginary, right? It's the square root of a negative number. So those are going to get kicked out. And that leaves me, there's 2 of them over there. I needed 3 total. So that leaves me with just negative 3 here as my answer. Okay? Again, you have to pay attention to directions as to if you're factoring or if you're solving. Because there's different things to do on different ones. Okay? 5 homework problems due on